Henry Ford tried to bring America to the jungle, delivering a lifestyle filled with luxuries and
rubber
ideals.
is still alive and
Billions of
well.
dollars in today's money. Throw away billions of dollars.
Imagine this. It's 1929, and you're strolling through what seems to be an ordinary suburban American town. You see single-family homes adorned with white picket fences, men making their way to work at the town's factory, and businesses like bakeries, butchers, and shoe shops opening their doors for the day. This place seems completely uninteresting, but suddenly you hear the raucous screech of a monkey and realize that you are not in fact in suburban America, but you are actually 3,810 miles away and deep in the Amazon rainforest. More specifically, you are in Fordlândia, Henry Ford's failed attempt to bring American industry to Brazil's jungle. In this video, I'm going to explore why this quixotic town was built in the first place, leading up to its trivial rise and spectacular fall. But first, we need to look at just who Henry Ford was, so that we can understand how his beliefs, motivations, and financing brought this place into being. Ford, best known for inventing the first commercially successful vehicle, the Model T, was born in 1863 in Dearborn, Michigan. He was the first surviving son in his family and grew up on his family's farm. As an adult, he expressed great fondness for his youth in small-town America, implementing his idealization of it when he tried to create his own utopia in Fordlândia. After years of passionately developing various quote-unquote horseless carriages, Ford founded the Ford Motor Company in 1903 and 5 years later revolutionized the transportation industry with the invention of the Model T. Because the Model T was in such high demand, Ford introduced the assembly line production strategy in order to quickly produce vehicles. Both the Model T and the assembly line were so successful that, at one point, a new Model T vehicle was being completed every 24 seconds. Although Ford is largely remembered for his positive impact on American industry, he did embrace absolutely unacceptable anti-Semitic, racist, and imperialist views, which unfortunately drove many of the ideals he attempted to implement in Fordlândia. With the acknowledgement that Ford harbored and acted on extremely problematic views, we're going to take a look at the economic and political factors that, combined with parts of Ford's intolerable ideology, led to the creation of Fordlândia. As king of his own automobile empire, Ford had to find ways to maintain enough resources to keep up his swift rate of vehicle production. For the most part, he had no trouble with this, but as historian Greg Grandin puts it, the Ford Motor Company in the 1920s pretty much controlled every raw material that went into the making of a motor car. The glass, the iron, the wood, the lumber, everything except latex. While the lack of latex, the raw material used to make rubber for tires, does not sound unusually alarming, a major disruption in the rubber industry had been unfolding in the background of Ford's business for some time, and actually posed a huge threat to Ford's company. The rubber industry was fairly stable until the late 1800s, with unforgiving Brazilian plantations led by so-called latex lords being the world's primary rubber producers. At the time, latex lords were very powerful. Brazil was far away under Portuguese rule, and the increasing demand for rubber was starting to strain Brazil's rubber supply. With these challenges, compounded with the abundance of natural predators and rubber trees native to Brazil often stymieing rubber production, rubber consumers had every reason to want to disrupt the rubber industry in their favor. This is exactly what happened when a British explorer named Henry Wickham smuggled over 1,000 pounds of rubber tree seeds back to England with him in 1876. This was just a few decades before Ford started producing vehicles. Once rubber seeds had made their way to the Old World, the seeds found their way to European colonies in Southeast Asia, where rubber trees, liberated from any kind of natural predator, thrived, shifting power in the rubber industry almost entirely to the Europeans. Not wanting to purchase rubber at the high prices set by European rubber cartels, Ford decided that he needed his own rubber supply. Since rubber trees only grew in the tropics, Ford began looking abroad for somewhere to source his rubber plantation. Brazil was no longer a serious contender in the rubber industry by this point, but, eager to win its place back, it happily provided Ford with over 6 million acres of land for his rubber plantation, and thus Fordlândia was born. At its peak, Fordlândia was home to over 10,000 people, both Americans and Brazilians alike. The town was complete with a school, hospital, sawmill, generator, and many shops, in addition to the town's all-important rubber plantation. Work in Fordlândia was hard, but Ford promised high wages, free healthcare, and free education. These incentives attracted many, but living in Fordlândia was more tense than any of its residents had thought. Ford didn't just want to create his own cheap source of rubber, he wanted to create a utopia where all people would supposedly thrive while living according to his ideology. This may have worked to some degree in America, or even in Fordlandia if Ford had at least attempted to understand local culture. But forcing his version of a perfect American society on indigenous Brazilians failed miserably. Some of Ford's most unpopular mandates included a ban on alcohol, obligatory English-only sing-alongs, and eating according to Ford's vegetarian diet. Additionally, Ford insisted on maintaining a standard 9-to-5 work schedule on his rubber plantation, which severely clashed with the Brazilian workers' routine of working early in the morning, breaking for the hottest part of the day, and then finishing work in the evening. Tensions peaked in 1930 when a shift in cafeteria dining service led to 3 days of riots and $1 million in damage. While the cultural tensions were pretty disastrous, to say the least, Ford had a bigger problem. Fordlandia wasn't producing any rubber. You could probably say that Ford's biggest mistake in developing Fordlandia was that he, an engineer and businessman with no experience in botany whatsoever, did not consult anyone about his plans for a rubber plantation in Fordlandia. This meant that he decided to plant rubber trees wherever and however he felt like, without taking into account what these trees needed to thrive. As Matt Anderson of the Henry Ford Museum puts it, Ford thought that he could just go down there and take this raw jungle and turn it into an industrial enterprise. His ambitions got ahead of his abilities in this case. The catastrophic result of Ford's stubbornness was that rubber trees were planted very close together in tight rows, which provided an ideal environment for bugs preying on rubber trees to thrive, and therefore Ford's rubber trees became sickly and unproductive. After about 2 decades of pouring money into Fordlandia, Ford finally shut down the plantation in 1945 and sold the land back to the Brazilian government for only a few $100,000. Fordlandia was an economic and cultural disaster, but maybe it could have fared better if Ford hadn't tried to manage his South American rubber plantation as if it were a Midwestern factory. Today, Fordlandia still exists, but it is largely abandoned with only a few thousand people living there. The remains of the town are accessible to tourists by a 1.5-day trip up the Tapajos River by boat, and although the inception and decline of this unique town are absurd enough to capture the attention of many, Fordlandia will be remembered as a perfect example of what not to do.